So no mention of the trivium method would be complete without also including the quadrivium. Now, this is really amazing. If you want to learn about some very deep occult knowledge, and you've made it this far into the video, because I know I can be kind of dry. I acknowledge that. And I'm working on making my presentation style a little more interesting, but not to the point that I just make it like some typical YouTube video, just trying to get attention and up my metrics. I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in conveying the real and actual and valuable teaching, right? But if you've made it this far, you are about to be revealed. Something's about to be revealed to you that is going to be very special. And by the way, in this slide, this is essentially this is showing the 7 liberal arts. I'm going to go into this, and you're going to be like, "Holy crap, this is amazing." At least when this was first taught to me, I still am dumbfounded by this. I knew there was something to this when someone showed me what this all meant, and I'm forever grateful. And also, you can see that character in the lower right on the slide. He has the word magi written next to him, right? So that's no coincidence, of course. This trivium I'm teaching you, by the way, is kind of it's a perfect crossover between the occult and just good old classical education. These are worlds that cross over perfectly when it comes to the 7 liberal arts. So the quadrivium is quite special, and I think you're going to enjoy this part. So the trivium and quadrivium together are what are known as the 7 liberal arts. And of course, the word quadrivium, you guessed it, quad is 4, right? So you can have 7 liberal arts total. So to the seekers, mystics, and classically educated alike, this method of learning represents the foundational disciplines from which the most notable influencers of human history are most certainly alumni. While the trivium is a self-contained discipline in its own right, suitable for the proper education of philosophers, politicians, and lawyers, grammar, logic, and rhetoric are prerequisites for students moving on to the quadrivium, which is the next level of study. Okay? The trivium is primarily concerned with metaphysics, okay, or the esoteric and inner world of being, in a sense, although the metaphysics of the quadrivium go very deep, okay. The trivium you could think of as the humanities in a sense, where the quadrivium is the sciences. So the quadrivium is primarily concerned with the physical, exoteric, the outer world of being, the sciences. The trivium is the metaphysics, is the humanities. It's the inner world, right? You see a pattern here, this inner and outer world, as above, so below. This goes really deep, kids. So mastery of all the 7 liberal arts affords the graduate the facilities in which, I would say the faculties, that's a typo, affords the graduate the faculties in which to understand subjects of the entire world, both inner and outer. Okay? Now here's the magic of the quadrivium. Just as the trivium must be taught and used in a specific order, the same is true for the quadrivium. Okay. Now these slides, I'm starting from the lower left and going upwards to the upper right. Now the first part of the quadrivium is mathematics, and that's a study of numbers in the abstract. Okay, that's the first discipline. The second discipline is geometry, the study of number in space. Okay. Music is the third. That is the study of number in time. And this is where it gets really interesting. Astronomy is the fourth and final piece, the final discipline of the quadrivium. That is the study of number in space and time. Okay, so you can see something very interesting happening here. Astronomy is the combination of the lower three. You start with mathematics in the abstract. Then you start with geometry, which is numbers in space. Music is numbers in time. And then astronomy combines all three. And it's the study of number in space and time. Right? So to be an astronomer at any age, from the time of Galileo unto today, really, in a very real sense, means you have a method, or you have an understanding from which to observe and understand the outer world, right? So each discipline transcends and includes the one that came before. Once all of these disciplines are mastered, they serve as the foundation from which the learner may begin to study and understand every aspect of the phenomenal world. Okay? So this 7 liberal arts essentially teaches you how to think in respect to the inner metaphysical worlds of the humanities, or what it means to be human, how to convince people, how to think, and also how to think about your understanding of the outside world, the sciences, right? And this is a very, very powerful method. Sir Isaac Newton, known as the last of the magicians, is widely recognized as one of the most influential scientists of all time. I think we can all agree on this, right? Newton is one of many students who attained mastery of the 7 liberal arts. Newton was an alchemist, astronomer, theologian, physicist, and mathematician. He saw no distinction between alchemy, science, and magic. If it weren't for Newton's mastery of the 7 liberal arts and his study of the occult science of alchemy, it is regarded doubtful at best that the scientific insights he attained about our world would have occurred at all. Here's a great quote from the life of Isaac Newton, an award-winning biographer. Newton's interest in alchemy cannot be isolated from his contributions to science. Okay. We've got this notion that there's science and then everything else is a bunch of crap. Some things humans need as a crutch, but science is really where it's at, right? But this notion, as we know, if you're a seeker, if you're a spiritual person, you know that science doesn't give us the complete picture. You know that we'll essentially never have the complete picture. But our understanding can be expanded greatly, right? By venturing outward from just the objective world view of science. So I should briefly mention the 3 main classifications of professional endeavor which exist in the world, because this is something to do with classical education, which I find is interesting and may give you some perspective on the world that you may not have had. These 3 main classifications of endeavor Also, we'll show you the difference between the liberal arts and other fields of endeavor or fields of knowledge. Okay, so each of these three classes of endeavor contains, of course, magicians or magi, sorcerers, and normals in varying degrees. However, the most influential classes of endeavor in terms of word magic and how to think are shown below in order. Okay. The three main categories of endeavor, or that is to say, how one contributes to society, because you have to contribute to society in some specific way. There's only three main categories. The first is the liberal arts. These are people such as philosophers, politicians, lawyers, thinkers, influencers, people that know how to think for themselves, right? The next group they're also influencers. They're from the fine arts. These are creators of finished works of art. These could be actors. These could be writers, directors, cinematographers, artists, sculptors, right? These people can also influence the world, albeit in different ways, right? That's the second type of endeavor, is fine arts. Just finished art, art for art's sake, right? And the third, and this is the category that most of us are in, the servile arts or service, right? The servile arts are everything else. So if you're not schooled in the liberal arts or the fine arts, or you have an informal, you've come into an informal understanding of the liberal arts and the fine arts, and your pursuits are in those fields, then you're in the third classification, the servile arts. And that's everything to do with goods and services. So anyone from salesperson to an attorney, construction worker, teacher, right? Anyone. That's all the servile arts. A janitor or a doctor, service to others, right? Like a direct type of practical service, right? Those are the three main types of endeavor in this world. There are no others. There are people that fall through the cracks, right? That they flat don't do anything for a profession, for a life's work. They're not pursuing anything. We're not talking about that group. We're talking about the three main types of endeavor. So you can see that the influencers of the world, people that have really changed the world, typically come from the first group, the liberal arts, right? And these might be people that they're trained in the clergy. Maybe they came into this, maybe they had no formal education at all. Maybe it's a stand-up comedian. Maybe it's a public figure, a public commentator, right? But what they have in common with people that have a formal liberal arts education is they learned themselves to a degree. They found themselves to such degree that they learned what was right, what was wrong for them. They learned how to think, not what to think, right? That's the distinction to be made here. So in summary, the 7 liberal arts of antiquity, all the way through to today, they ask the very same questions which are contemplated today by modern liberal arts study. They ask the same questions, right? While the methods of teaching the 7 liberal arts have evolved over time, the age-old questions they pose remain the same. And why is that? It's because they have been answered in so many different ways by different people, because it depends on who you talk to. Like, for example, one of the oldest philosophical questions could be, for example, what does what does it take to have a happy life? Or how can you pursue a happy life? Or how can you find your happiness? How can you find your bliss? Right? That's an age-old question that people have been asking for a very long time. Okay? Knowing how to think for yourself empowers you to answer those questions for you. You may not be able to answer those questions for others. Maybe you can answer those questions for others. But for yourself is first and foremost what you must discover. Only from knowing the answers to some of those questions for yourself, then you can maybe, possibly help others, right? So while the view of Plato is primarily investigations into the metaphysical or what of our world, and the view of Aristotle concerns the how of our physical world, together, both of these philosophical perspectives are to be found and can be explored most fully by those who master the 7 liberal arts. Now, you can just learn the trivium and be done with it, right? You can learn the trivium and have a wonderful method for learning throughout your entire life to your benefit and to the benefit of others. So the trivium in and of itself can be, that is all you need. You don't have to go on and learn the quadrivium, right? Quite a few people just learn the trivium, right? I suppose you could jump to the quadrivium, although that would presume you would already know grammar, logic, and rhetoric, because you would have to apply that systematic approach for learning found in the trivium. You'd have to apply that to the subjects of the quadrivium as well. So it's kind of required. So you have to have that. So the quadrivium is an Aristotelian, discipline in nature, right? In that it addresses the outer physical world, or that which is measurable, which remains the underlying philosophy of course, modern materialist science. So here we can see this image of Plato on the left and Aristotle on the right, and we can see that we have the trivium and the quadrivium, or we have the metaphysical world and the physical world, right? And the entire phenomenal existence of the world lies in both of these teachings, both of these disciplines, or both of these worldviews, as embodied by the philosophers Plato and Aristotle. Okay? So a classical education really isn't about having knowledge of philosophy, being able to recite, Plato and, no, it has nothing to do with that, right? A classical education is just learning how to think for yourself. And then what you do from there is completely up to you, right? It's completely up to you. And that's the beauty of it, is it's not some old dusty, it's not some old crusty old philosophy learning about old dead white men that lived thousands of years ago. It has nothing to do with that. That's the general perception, right? But once you have a classical education, you can take it into any new endeavor you want. You can completely forge your own path, right? You're not going to be sitting around talking about philosophy and classical literature with a bunch of stuffed shirts, right, that you have nothing in common with. That's not the idea. That's a perception that people bring. That's people bringing the old to the new, or they bring what they believe something is about, but they let that cloud their judgment, because because were told what to think about it instead of thinking about it for themselves. So it was understood in antiquity, all the way through European history and into our modern day, that the complete education of a free-minded man or woman had to begin at the very foundation of Western civilization itself, namely the philosophies of Plato and Aristotle, of course. That's the foundation for everything in the West. That's the foundation for our entire civilization. Only by understanding the very foundation of the modern Western world and how it came to exist in the way that it does today would one then be free to think critically about the world and investigate it for themselves, without the prejudice or bias which arise from the mind of those whom are taught what to think. Okay? Just as our worldview and way of thinking was directly influenced by these men who lived over 2,000 years ago, of which their age-old questions have only been fully inspected by a relative few, much less answered. It is also true that the original power and intent of word magic is very much just as alive and well. To the seeker whom educates him or herself, the operations of word magic can be laid bare, guarded against, and used for the betterment of self and humankind. Now, of course, formal education aside, we must account for those certain individuals who lack any type of formal education for the most part, and yet somehow they figure out, somehow they intuitively discover how to think for themselves, and they're able to translate this understanding of self into an explicit form, right? And communicate this to the world in some way. You communicate through your music, through your speaking, through your jokes, through your art, whatever it is. This is what I'm talking about, right? Or they can communicate some other physical expression, right? This is called finding your voice, essentially, right? People that learn how to think are going to find their voice. Okay? More often than not. Much more often than someone who just went to a regular school, was taught what to think. Right? They're not teaching you to have a voice. Okay? If you went to most public schools, if you went to most state universities, period, you were not taught to find your voice. You were taught, pick something, pick this major, pick this minor. Here's a bunch of information. That's what you were taught. You weren't taught how to find your own voice. Our civilization puts great emphasis on explicit knowledge and is often skeptical about the same set of knowledge that people can arrive at in an implicit or tacit sense. Okay? The word tacit comes from the Proto-Indo-European root word tak, which means to be silent, right? As in, some things go without saying, but not really. Tacit knowledge, if you look at this slide here, tacit knowledge is the deep understanding underneath the surface. Okay. Explicit knowledge is this. Now look at this image of the iceberg here. Explicit knowledge is this like superficial knowledge that others can see. Okay, think of yourself as an iceberg, and think of the fact that you can see what's above the water, but no one else can see or detect what's below the surface except you. Okay? So, explicit knowledge is very important when we need to demonstrate what we know or what we understand for others. Pretty much what I'm doing here, right? What everyone's doing on YouTube. Implicit knowledge and tacit knowledge is just as important, but it represents what we've come to know without words. This is where the word magic comes in, right? Because remember, word magic is all about knowing before language. And if you know before language, then language is easy. Language is just a piece of cake. Expressing yourself in the wider world, in the explicit world, is easy. Once you come into this deep, implicit, or tacit understanding of yourself, right? So this knowing without words, or what we know, which needn't or cannot be shared with others through either the written or spoken word, right? That's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about implicit or tacit knowledge. You can't put it into words. Okay. Most of human understanding, of course, just like this iceberg, is under the surface. It's tacit in nature. It exists, it's real, it's actual, but it never sees the light of day. Nor can it, because it is tacit. It is underneath the surface. Okay? It's like you're unconscious. Your unconscious self is so much more knowledgeable and wise, and nothing gets past the unconscious. The unconscious doesn't lie to you. The unconscious is so, there's most of you is your unconscious, and then there's a little bit that's your conscious, right? Or your explicit knowledge. So the seeker learns how to demonstrate their implicit knowledge through their actions, right? Because that's a great way to express what you know deep down, what you understand. And by the way, there's a big difference between knowledge and understanding. There's a reason why on this iceberg, I put explicit knowledge at the top above the surface, right? And then just beneath the surface, it shifts to implicit knowledge / understanding and tacit knowledge / understanding. There's explicit understanding. It has no weight, because an understanding is what you know without being able to articulate. Or you can know something, you can understand something and articulate it, but you're not able to transfer what you understand fully into that person merely by using words. That's what I'm talking about. Okay. So all of the unspoken or implicit understandings within you, okay, should be continually expanding into the world as a certain energy form, just as your explicit understanding of the world and how you interact with it should be growing as well. So you should be growing in several different areas. In your explicit, the way you express yourself, the world of interactions with people, and also you should be growing, you should be deepening your understanding in your tacit understanding, your tacit knowledge, your implicit knowledge of yourself underneath the surface. If you grow the iceberg underneath, or you not maybe grow the iceberg, but you explore the iceberg under the surface and really get to know yourself, the next time you come up for air and you are able to express yourself in a explicit way to others into the wider world, right, into the conscious world, you can express yourself so much better. That's what finding your voice is. That is finding your voice, right? So that's a wrap for part 11. Thank you for joining me on this one. I think this part was one of my favorites. It was, I hope that it opened some eyes, raised some eyebrows, dropped some jaws, whatever. I hope it was, I hope you really enjoyed it, because I think when that was shared with me many, many years ago, I knew I had quite a gift in front of me. I didn't know how to process it in the beginning, but having a decade of thinking about this and using this method, I finally feel like I'm ready to do this method justice and teach this in a way that I can hopefully light a fire for some of you to go on your own, to progress in your own journey like others have helped me, and that you can use this knowledge for good, hopefully. Nothing but good, right? But you can use it for the betterment of your own life and your loved ones and those around you. Okay, that's a wrap for this one. I'll see you guys